Thank you very much, Paola. So now over to you, Professor Ramón Sanchez. Thank you all very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. I will be presenting something that represents us all. As Aryanne said, we've been working since late 2021, throughout 2022, in looking at the status of innovation ecosystems throughout the Americas, from Alaska down to Patagonia, and we've made diagnoses of innovation ecosystems. What we've attempted to do was not only diagnosing, but also strengthening local innovation ecosystems. As was just mentioned, I think by Paola, we have a huge responsibility to make this work locally. I'll be giving you a number of data to give you an idea of the size of the problem. There are 4 cities that gather 52% of all the risk of venture capital on the planet. These are Los Angeles, Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston. Amongst the 4 of them, they account for 52 to 55% of all the country's venture capital. So it's 4 cities only in the same country, in one country, and this is not referring to European and Latin American entrepreneurs and what they receive. Let me give you another fact from the US. Within the US, only 14% of all venture capital and angel capital are addressed to companies led by women. So this is a huge disparity. But if you'd like to hear something even more striking, which is painful for all of us, 1.5% of all venture capital goes to companies led by Hispanics, just 1.5. And you will say, that's very serious. For Afro-Americans, it's only 1%. So this is just to give you an idea of how unequal entrepreneurship is in high impact investments, etc. Just to give you the context of why it's so important to strengthen local innovation ecosystems. We need investors to be present not only in 4 cities, but in all major cities in the Americas. And the reason is to reduce poverty. I need not mention to you the level of poverty in all of our countries. I am from Mexico, just to give you my background. 23% of all people in Latin America and the Caribbean are poor. And as you may realize, this raises many issues because it reduces our capability to build not only innovation ecosystems, but systems, infrastructures, anything that will bridge, that will reduce poverty and does not allow us to prepare for pandemics or extreme phenomena. There has just been a hurricane in Mexico that went from tropical storm all the way to Category 5 in a matter of hours. Imagine what it's like to prepare to face these things, but it was the poor who suffered most. That's what we do. Why is Harvard's public health school related to entrepreneurship? Because we want the SDGs to be met. Goal number 1 is reducing poverty. However, every one of the Sustainable Development Goals has a purpose that helps us improve the lives of every individual on the planet. So what we do is try to strengthen innovation ecosystems and support high impact microenterprises, startups, because that way we will be fulfilling the SDGs. Look at this company called Luxelare. They use drones for agriculture purposes. So notice this drone here, which looks like an airplane. It flies over fields and makes spectrographic analysis of chlorophyll to see where it's being produced and where it's not. And based on that, it analyzes the places where it's being produced. This can be done by humans or, for example, by this helicopter here, which flies over the area and can detect pests or issues of lack of humidity or irrigation or a lack of nutrients in the soil or fertilizer absence. So if the problem is easily solved, it can apply fertilizer in that area and 4 or 5 meters around the area, thus reducing the use of fertilizers by 50%, but especially the use of pesticides that is reduced. It gets to an area where it detects there are animals, and it may be because of decoloration of the leaves or fungi. It will decide to apply pesticides in that spot and 4 or 5 meters around it, thus reducing fertilizer use by 50%, increasing production by 55% and reducing irrigation water. In what proportion? From 35 to 70%, depending on the variety being grown. But this company helps us meet SDG 2, no hunger. We could also say number 1 as well, because it does reduce poverty. All of them will be in aid of goal number 1, but they will have an area of expertise or specialty in another SDG. Look at this one. It's called Biosense. They manufacture a bracelet, which is a non-invasive glucometer that measures glucose in the bloodstream in real time. It also measures the pulse, temperature, and other things. Why is this important? Because while in our countries, diabetes as a very strong chronic disease is growing, many older persons are told to measure sugar in their bloodstream before they eat in the morning. And 2 or 3 hours after eating, they need to pinch their finger and use the strips and use an invasive glucometer. Many older persons fail to do it because it hurts. After a while, their fingers hurt. Another reason is the strips for measuring sugar are expensive. So what you can do with this bracelet is wear it as a watch. That is why I have worn my watch to show you. And it will immediately start measuring glucose, your pulse, and everything else in real time. So anyone with diabetes or pre-diabetes may manage their diabetes adequately, because let's assume they ate a cookie they shouldn't have. And at that point, the watch will start indicating you're past 1,500 milligrams per deciliter already. Your glucose level is too high. You need to do something about it. What can you do? You can walk, or you can administer medicine, insulin, or some other oral medicine. But the important thing is it will remain glucose at a given level that is below the level where permanent damage could be caused, like diabetic retinopathy, harm in their liver or kidneys, and this may prevent amputation. And have a look at this other one, Proton, which developed a biological solar panel, which works by placing a protein between 2 sheets of glass. When you give water to this protein and expose it to any kind of light, it immediately starts creating hydrogen. And this hydrogen can be used either to create heat, electricity, and many people even think it can be used to power cars, hydrogen cars. It's 70% more efficient than silicon solar panels in low light conditions. And let's pretend in the north of the US, Canada, the north of Japan, Korea, Russia. Imagine we wanted to apply it in our countries. It would be as if the southern regions of Chile and Argentina, and I think also Uruguay at certain times of the year, would be comparable. So this can be truly helpful, and also in the forest. with heavy rainfall, but it could help immensely because it's a biological solar panel. All of the ideas you just heard about came from Ibero-America, all of them without exception. However, the persons who developed these systems live in cities with entrepreneurship support systems which are very weak or inexistent. And that is a limiting factor because it makes them win competitions locally based on the technologies they developed, and then they stop because of lack of funding for growth purposes. They don't have enough funding to grow. So we have a paradox in that talent is equitably distributed worldwide, while access to development and financing tools to develop a high-impact corporation is not equally distributed. That is why I mentioned that there are 4 cities that account for at least 50% of all venture capital. And that is telltale of the concentration in certain areas or places and the low impact from financing and tools for development in other places. So this bears a relationship with risk. The higher the risk, my mistake, says the speaker, the higher risk, the higher the interest rate a bank would charge on a loan. So for something like a restaurant, if you have a business plan for a restaurant and it's moderate risk, what we will do is use Argentine beef and make tacos in a fusion cuisine style. If we know how many people will go there, who likes it, we will be managing risk adequately and it will be low risk. And so the bank will lend me money. However, if I have a non-invasive, non-intrusive glucometer, my risk is higher and the risk curve is exponential. And it turns out that the interest rate is much higher than what the bank determines is safe to lend money. So that's the issue. I won't be given any funding with my high impact and high risk venture. And that's the situation for the startups I just described, in addition to many others that exist in the Americas. So as a result, talented persons make their business plans, their value propositions, and when they fail to find financing in their cities of origin, start looking for ways to migrate to other places where there are support systems that will allow their companies to grow. Many end up in Silicon Valley, others in Boston, others in New York, and others in Los Angeles. Precisely for that reason, there is greater concentration. They attract talent not only from the US, but from Canada and the rest of the Americas, and let alone people who come from Asia, Europe, and elsewhere. And that's why we have those huge innovation giants in the ecosystem. As it turns out, this makes things difficult because it is young people who tend to create businesses but cannot grow them. Why can't they? Because they have no access to financing. Young adults have maximum creativity. I could spend an hour showing you how in Harvard creativity goes down with age. The capacity to create original ideas plateaus from 18 to 38, and then it goes down. But that's arguable. But young people are highly creative. That is to say, they know how to land things, new ideas. They can implement them. Why? Because they just graduated from university or the vocational school or college, whatever. They have some tools that allow them to implement things. They have time available, although they think it's not the case. But if they stopped being on social media, they'd realize they have time. But they have no money, no credit history, so banks won't lend them any money. Some have student loans. They have the willingness to grow professionally, that idea where they are told before you are 30, you need to be a manager or director, otherwise you won't be successful over life, or the drive to build a family. I call this the nuclear attack from the WhatsApp chats. What do I mean? Hey, leave that startup and find a serious job so you can get married. Otherwise, you won't be able to get married. That's what young people are being told. And for that reason, society recommends that they should refrain from investing in a startup, in a high-risk venture. Why does this happen? Where is the issue? This curve is an S life cycle curve, so to speak, where I have money on the one hand and time on the other axis. As time goes by, we have certain features as part of the development curve in a business. At the very beginning, once they've thought of the idea but haven't spent any time or money on it, that's what when they think about the idea, but then they need to develop it. And usually during this gestation phase, government or governments pay for this. How? By awarding money for elementary research to universities, research scholarships, fiscal incentives, prizes on innovation, money for prototyping, or installations for demonstrations. So at the beginning of the life of any technology business, it's the government paying for them. If you'd like to look at Tesla, you'd be surprised to see the development in electric vehicles and battery technologies, etc. Before the electric vehicle one was ready by General Motors. And then when the government decided to stop that financing, it became a company that was later purchased by Elon Musk. And that's where Tesla comes from. However, Elon Musk didn't develop electric vehicles. Those were developed earlier and with plenty of support from the government. So during the gestation phase, it's a government paying. This is the expansion phase for the business where it's the market financing this. How? With sales, technology licenses, with IPOs that are made in the stock exchange, with franchises, consultancy agreements, service agreements, etc. But it's a market paying at this stage. So from the beginning of the life to expansion, things have changed. However, there is one stage where we go from demonstration day. Imagine you or entrepreneurs get aid from the government until they show their product or service works. And by that time, usually government support dissipates. That's the usual. And okay, but here's where we go into the death valley, which is from the time entrepreneurs demonstrate their product or service and run out of government support until the time they can make money on their own and grow or expand their business. So how can we surpass the valley of death in Ibero-America? With bank loans at very high interest rates, loans from friends and acquaintances, or with legal and illegal government connections. I'll be pragmatic here. Many people incur in insider trading in our countries. So that's how we try to overcome the valley of death. And the death rate is from 70 to 90% for high impact startups. And pretend this is what's happening. I have made this graphic here. On the one hand, you have the government rock paying for the inception, the gestation of a business. It may be technology or socially based, a high impact one, but it's a government paying for the initial stages. And then we have the rock of the market. Here's where the market pays for the business expansion. But in the middle, we have the valley of death. The death valley we try to overcome with high interest rate loans from banks, with financing from our friends and relatives and government connections. And from 7 to 9 of the 10 that take this leap won't make it to the other side. They will disappear. And that's what's important in the development of an innovation ecosystems. The innovation ecosystem is everything that it allows us to create a chart that goes all the way to the middle or more to reduce the death rate of high impact companies. This is what's important. This is what I wanted to get to.
As I was saying, death rate is between 75 and 90%. And when high impact startups die, you know, the gap between those and successful enterprises, you know, let's pretend that we're looking at a nature ecosystem. Well, this is what they look like. There are a lot of restaurants, hotels, food businesses, hardware stores, different kinds of stores, parking lots. This is what successful companies look like, right? Where innovation ecosystems are low. And you might say, well, we also have software development, we have AI, we also have blockchain and stuff. And that is true. However, that is not what can provide a living for most of the population. And between 10 to 20% of high impact startups will survive. That's pretty low. So we can see there is a lack of support creating this situation. That is why from my department in cooperation with the OAS, we have the mission to ensure that anybody who has a great idea, it can be a business or a social idea, is able to get the necessary funding regardless of their credit history, their age, their experience, or their political connections. And in this way, we seek to create startups that can contribute to reducing the burden on governments and universities and reaching the SDGs. An innovation ecosystem can be a difficult concept to grasp. So that is why we created an analogy. It says here that the entire community needs to work in tandem in order to help, you know, young people who lack political connections, who lack a credit history, to help them get funds in order to bring their projects to fruition. And that is why we've provided this image here. On the left, we see a natural ecosystem. We have a natural water ecosystem here. We see algae and microorganisms that take the energy from the sun and turn it into chemical energy. That energy is eaten by the smaller fish, and then the smaller fish is eaten by the crane, and then the crane is eaten by the eagle, right? Predators as they go up in the scale. This entire system works in perfect balance in nature. And if we remove one element from it, then the entire system stops working. Let's say we remove algae, which are like the first filters for energy, right? Well, two things will happen. Number one, plankton and green algae will overgrow, but also zooplankton will overgrow since they are trying to feed on plankton, right? And this will take oxygen from the system, which will in turn kill the smaller fish. This will in turn kill the bigger fish, and the bigger predators will end up migrating because the ecosystem is no longer sustainable. But in this scenario, we just removed the first link. And the same thing happens with a human innovation ecosystem. We try to help entrepreneurs have access to funds, but instead of having algae and animal predators here, we have entrepreneurs, we have governments, we have the academia, research centers, we have risk capital investors, angel investors, we have risk philanthropists. we have, incubators, accelerators, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? We have all of these elements. And if we were to remove only one element to this ecosystem, this whole ecosystem would stop working. And let's look at an example. Somewhere in Latin America, angel investors are forbidden. They're not allowed to invest. And why is that? Well, because people are scared of money laundering, because these angel investors may end up laundering money obtained from crimes, right? So without these investors, entrepreneurs take care of the entire development. And, usually in a mature ecosystem, after an idea is developed, that goes to an angel investor who can provide, let's say, $1 million and get a 5 to 10% of the company in order to make the project work. We see this in a lot of investor reality shows. Of course, they get a higher percentage in these reality shows, but what actually happens in an innovation ecosystem is a little bit different than what we see on TV. If angel investors are not allowed to exist, then entrepreneurs are not going to be able to overcome the valley of death. Usually, angel investors lead to the first generation of customers, and based on that, entrepreneurs can develop a value proposition in order to seek capital. But without that a first step of angel investors, then entrepreneurs do not have access to risk capital. And one of two things end up happening: either they stop or they migrate, and that is why they end up in Silicon Valley, Boston, and New York. Here you can see how an innovation ecosystem can be destroyed. And let's remove another element. Not only investors. Let's just say we remove basic research, or we remove the link between universities and companies. If we remove this link, a lot of research ends up taking place in universities, a lot of papers end up getting written, but none of that reaches society, and society in turn thinks that researchers are not doing their work. That is what happens when the link between the academia and the industry is removed. And when that link exists, then science projects are developed in universities, and that knowledge is transferred to society, and it takes the shape of the first high impact startups, which in turn gives way to new companies, new jobs, economic development, and further innovation. Also, large companies sometimes co-develop technology projects with universities, and that ends up providing a benefit for the both of them. That is what an innovation system looks like. So in order to ensure a good support system for innovation and entrepreneurs, we need copyright frameworks, right? And here's some good news. Out of every country that we've analyzed in the Americas, except for some exceptional cases such as Haiti, for instance, where copyright doesn't work as properly, in every other country, copyright is healthy. The main issue are the mechanisms for fund transfer between investors and entrepreneurs. We do have universities, we do have research centers, but they need to collaborate with the community, and that is where that link needs to exist. We need laws to support innovation in order to lure high impact investors into our countries. Sometimes we get asked, why don't you have angel investors or risk capital investors in your communities? Well, that is why we sometimes don't have laws that regulate their responsibilities and their incentives to be part of the community. Some countries, some legislations are not even discussing the matter because they simply don't understand it. And that is why some investors are just on standby mode in Boston when they could be in Colombia at their office, listening to entrepreneurs, investing and spending the warmer months in Latin America. But since they don't find the conditions for that, they just don't do it. And something that we're really good at in Latin America is innovation structures. We have built buildings that are incubators and accelerators. But sometimes these buildings, you know, they are amazing, but they don't have any software. That's what happens. And we also see here that there's a lacking, you know, link between society and graduates. Why do we need doctors, engineers, accountants? Well, because we need professional diversity, because that is what leads to high impact startups. And we have amazing professionals in Latin America. We do have a lot of professional diversity. Well, let's move on to a mature ecosystem. And let me mention Boston in this case. In Boston, there are about 250,000 people working in startups. In the US, between 6 to 8 million people work in startups. A startup is defined as a micro company under 3 years old, and usually they are high impact technology companies that are part of innovation ecosystems. And just for some background, the population of the entire Boston metropolitan area is made up of about 3 million people. So 8% of the population works in a startup. And it's 8% of the entire population. If we just count the professional or active population in terms of work, the percentage would be much higher. When we have a mature innovation ecosystem, that ecosystem attracts investors and capital. Massachusetts has the highest investment rate in the United States in startups, and one of the highest in the world. In 2022, Massachusetts startups received $300,600 million. So $3.5 billion. And it depends on the investment round. That can go from $3 million, which is the average for the first round of capital investments. That can go from $3 million to $14 million for Series B or Series C companies. That is why we need to develop innovation ecosystems. Here we also see the government rock and the market rock, as we saw before, but startups' death rates is reduced. We are only losing between 10 and 25% of all startups. And startups are getting robust access to digital tools, as Aryanne was mentioning, you know, artificial intelligence, blockchain, Internet of Things, VR, augmented reality, all of those transformative technologies. They have angel investors, they have risk philanthropists, they have crowdfunding, they have collaborations from university players, they have company accelerators, they have incubators, they have adequate government interventions. So let's pretend this innovation ecosystem is this board right here that provides a cushion for startups that want to take that leap and reach that government rock. And that is what an innovation ecosystem, this is what an innovation ecosystem looks like in Boston. I'm not trying to pat my own back, but we are the best in medical devices. I think we are #1. Boston is #1 in terms of innovation for medical devices. We also work in the pharmaceutical industry, meaning we are leading innovators in healthcare. But for instance, we also invented radars here in Boston. The radar was invented here, and many other inventions happened here. In the medical industry, a lot of devices were invented in Boston. Robotics, we have robotics. We invented a lot of technology applications and renewable energies. And just to provide you with one example, I'll tell you about one company. In 2010, Derek Rosie funded a company to sell DNA technologies for vaccines. We had a virus that was changing every year, and we weren't able to prevent the common influenza. So in 2011, Flagship Ventures, a risk capital group, gave $9 million to this small company called Moderna, RNA. And in exchange for that, Derek Rosie gave a percentage of the stocks of the company to the investor. That company still has part of the shares of Moderna, and they were so interested in this technology that the investor bought most of the stocks of Moderna. In 2018, Moderna was able to gather $600 million on the first day. So what ended up happening, well, the pandemic hit, and this technology led to the development of vaccines in record time. We actually developed one of the COVID vaccines from Boston, and the rest is history. Now the company is worth $54.5 billion, and flagship stocks are $9.8 million. This was $8 million for the initial investment, and it grew exponentially. They were able to multiply their investment by 1,000. That is what happened. And this is what Moderna does. This is a proud company from Massachusetts in Boston. What does this have to do with what we're doing from the OAS? Well, over the past 10 years, we've managed to develop and applied methodologies for assessing innovation and sustainability ecosystems. And we take this information and work with community leaders in order to help them strengthen their ecosystems and help them replicate the practices that can be seen in mature ecosystems. We have three main steps. Step number one is evaluating or assessing regional ecosystems. Step number two is validating and reviewing this information with leaders and members of the community in order to determine whether the information that we've been able to gather is accurate and whether we can use it, whether we've managed to cover every single group of interest, etc. And step number three is we create a work plan in order to come up with actions to reduce problems and leverage the identified opportunities. Step number one is an online survey. So here you can see the links for 3 sites where we are conducting the first survey in Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay. And I will go ahead and send this presentation to the organizers, and I hope they can share it with you. But if you click these links, they will take you to our ongoing surveys. Right now, they are in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. We also have them available in French. I think the survey is available in 30 languages. This survey allows us to identify the score for each innovation system, and that allows us to identify the strong and weak points of each community so that we can come up with plans to accelerate their local innovation ecosystems. It took Silicon Valley almost 60 years to become what it is today. Boston took the example of Silicon Valley and it took them 40 years, but we're talking about decades here. So if we assess each local sustainability and innovation ecosystem, we could reduce that process to 4 years. And that is what's so valuable about these exercises. Every time we assess an innovation system, we create statistical graphs and distributions, because not everybody is on the same page with everything. Many people are not knowledgeable of certain topics, and that is why we create statistics. And we have ranges that allows us to tell where each community is in terms of sustainability and innovation. After that, we create a scoring, which is a measurement, right? So here, for instance, we see Clearwater, Florida. And why am I showing you this? Well, because the assessment that we will be conducting next year is going to be for the Central Valley, the central region of Florida. And here we see about 40-something percent percentile. And here you can see the areas of opportunities and the strengths of this region. You might ask us, how can you tell what is going on from outside? Well, let's just imagine that we are a doctor looking at a patient, right? We assess them and we come up with a plan to strengthen the ecosystem.
And so that's what we have. Look at the places where we've done it already, where you see, wherever you see a green star, that's been completed. Wherever you see yellow stars, that's where we are currently performing an assessment. For instance, we've completed Jamaica, Mexico, some places in the US and Canada. So we could say we have good elements for a diagnosis from Canada, the United States, generally speaking, Mexico, Jamaica, because it was throughout Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Colombia. Hey, we have Colombia's, but we didn't know who to present it to because there was a change in the administration. And that's precisely where the OAS may come in handy. We want to perform diagnoses of each country where we have information so that we can start working on it. As Aryanne said, then we have Costa Rica, Peru, Ecuador, Brazil, which we've just completed in several cities of the country, and we are currently doing it for Uruguay, Chile, and Argentina. We have no one from Bolivia. So if anyone from Bolivia is listening, perhaps we can do something so we can run a diagnosis there. So that's all we're doing in Latin America, but we did it in different places in the world, Southeast Asia, Europe, Africa, etc. And how do we tie this in? This is how I sold it to the public health school. Every time we did a sustainability and innovation assessment, we realized there seemed to be a correlation. Firstly, we didn't know whether there was a cause. So in certain ecosystems, we just gave them sustainability tools and innovation suddenly emerged. So there's a causal relationship between sustainability and innovation. Then we ran the experiment differently in other innovation ecosystems where we put only innovation tools and there was a sudden emergence of sustainability. And that prompted the causal relationship as a two-way stream from sustainability and innovation. That is why the School of Public Health is also trying to strengthen innovation ecosystems. And that is why we're working with the OAS, and the relationship is very strong. It's 75%, which means innovation accounts for 75% of sustainability and vice versa. So it's a pretty tight correlation. What do we do about the validation once we have a diagnosis? And here I'm presenting pictures of the time when the Prime Minister from Jamaica and the ambassador came to visit us. See here, to look at the results from the Jamaican assessment, which included all the cities in the country, and the director of Harvard Innovation Labs is here, the representative from internationalization from Harvard Business School, etc. And we presented preliminary results, item by item, and I asked them, notice that the diversity of various professionals is very good amongst you, but there's an issue in that you fail to explain to those who will graduate from the school what the critical path is of the high impact entrepreneur. And for that reason, they choose to find a job in the travel and tourism industry in Jamaica or do academic papers in universities, but they have two ways or two paths rather than three. The third would be build your own venture, seek financing, and expand your company to create jobs. And I was scared when I said this, and they said, you're perfectly right, but how do we go about doing it? And so we started discussing that. But this is like a medical doctor speaking to their patients privately. They will not publicize the diagnosis. And based on that, you can put together a plan that is tailor-made for each community to see how they can strengthen their innovation ecosystem. Thank you very much to the OAS, because this was made possible by them, the academia and an external organization, namely the OAS, have been cooperating strongly in this regard. What do we do to identify issues and leverage identified opportunities? Firstly, we determine what the priorities are. If you noticed in Clearwater, one of the main priorities was there was no internationalization. That was number one. So internationalization is the capacity of knowing where to source money from anywhere in the world. If your company deals with biotechnology and medicine, the innovation ecosystems where you may find money is not Silicon Valley, but Boston, for instance, because that's where the medical technology is, or Switzerland, maybe, or Tokyo. But you will know what your choices are for financing sources. Or if you have an advanced agriculture company and want to go to Silicon Valley, you won't be given any money there because that's not the innovation ecosystem for medicine or food production or any of that. You could go to Los Angeles a little bit, or maybe Austin, Texas, which is the best in the Americas, we could say, or you could go to the south or southwest of the Netherlands. That's where you'll find your money. As an example, so you see what the problem is, but you also decide on how to solve it. And then projects are developed to encourage emerging businesses that solve local issues. And generally, what we have is an overall educational program between the population, and I'll explain why in a moment, but high impact ventures or startups happen that reinforce local systems, which are later reinforced. I was asked by another country, not in Jamaica, how can we have angel investors? And I asked them, why don't you have investors now? Because we don't want any money laundering. So I told them, oh, but in other places, they made a register of angel investors. So we have an established business that has paid taxes for a given amount of time, or a company that has net worth, and if they can prove they've done it for a long time, they can register as angel investors, and entrepreneurs can only resort to registered angel investors. So when you go to the bank as an entrepreneur and get your check of $200,000 as an angel investor, you open a business account and you're immediately asked where the money came from, and you say from angel investor so, and the bank clerk will say, oh yeah, I see it here. And they will make the $200,000 available overnight. That's just one good example, right? So we've learned that when creating innovation ecosystems, number one, trying to bring leaders on board from the various countries, communities, etc., to places like MIT doesn't work. And I can tell you that 12 years ago, that's what we did. We brought ministers, mayors, business persons, deans, presidents from universities, etc., for them to look at the innovation ecosystem we had in Boston. We thought that they would go back to their countries and implement it. However, there were unforeseen consequences from that. We created an industry of tourism and in innovation. Everybody came to see how Harvard Innovation Lab and MIT Media Lab worked, how the various incubators and accelerators worked, the innovation district in Boston, etc. But then they went back to their countries and nothing happened. So we thought that was strange and wondered why, because these were the community leaders. And that's why when we ran exit interviews, when they were out of office already, they tell us the problem is I was on my own. So I spoke about creating legislation for innovation ecosystems. When I told them about that, they looked at me as if they didn't understand. So 3 or 4 days later, I went back to the way I was before and nothing happened. So there was no critical mass of knowledge. And that was the reason why they went back to their old practices as soon as they got back to their countries. So we started devising a local critical mass that would be knowledgeable about these things, that would know what a risk philanthropist is, an angel investor, a venture capitalist, how to make a presentation for them, how to pitch your business plan, how to develop a new product or service, but one that uses transformative technologies Aryanne mentioned, for instance. How can we assess sustainability? How can we reduce risk, etc.? But when we said critical mass, first we thought they would have 100 persons per city, and then we realized that the more people had this knowledge, the better we did. So the last one we did had 1,500 persons in a single state in Mexico, Hidalgo, as Aryanne mentioned. So what do? We provide sustainability and innovation tools, and this is how the classroom looks, where we are teaching this, and we see digital tools like AI, IoT, blockchain, AR, and virtual reality. But this is what the classroom looks like. So notice that from here, we tried to have members from the entire professional spectrum and cultural spectrum in the community. That's why we have so many people: engineers, lawyers, journalists, accountants, medical doctors, nurses, people who work in technology, etc. All of them are present. And amongst them, I asked them to do two things. One, to try and create their own venture or startup using the tools we are giving them, a high impact startup, but also for them to help us improve the local ecosystem. The analogy is adding nitrogen in one place until we have a strong gravitational field and the star is ignited. That's what we do to create a critical mass of individuals that will help us create the local innovation ecosystem. So it's not one leader, but a host of leaders in the community trying to develop the ecosystem. This is from the last one we did, the first day. Unfortunately, this was in August 2019, and you know what happened afterwards with COVID-19. But this is what classrooms looked like before COVID-19, and it's what we're trying to do to develop better ecosystems. Something else we do is ask the economic sectors or industries what their pain points are, and we share those lists of pain points with entrepreneurs because they can take some of the pain points there to build a high impact startup to solve it. Just to quote an example, in the south of Spain, one of the things they told us was energy, gas, etc. Utilities were extremely expensive, and they didn't they didn't produce it. And we asked them, have you heard about solar heat panels for water? Yes, we know they use them in other countries, but what will happen if there's no sun, etc. So a high impact startup was created that only manufactures and installs solar heaters. And a hotelier had a hotel with 300 odd rooms and was paying some 100,000 euro in fossil fuel to heat water for the rooms in the hotel year round. In his defense, he had a hostel and he had to heat the water in the pond in the winter. So they installed solar water heaters. He paid 80,000 euros for all the solar water heaters. He paid 100,000 euro per year for fossil fuel earlier. So with 80,000 euro, he was able to install solar heaters and had enough water for everything they needed. It was paid the first year, and then they had 29 years worth of free water. That's one example from one startup. So society's needs make the business case for a startup in addition to the tools we provide, plus the fact that we are strengthening the ecosystem. That is how we're trying to make the ecosystems mature in an accelerated fashion. And we also help entrepreneurs participate in innovation ecosystems. I was told by the mayor, don't forget to mention Boston. Well, I do mention it. Here's Boston. We lend to our investors in the innovation ecosystem while you develop your own in your own community. But we also teach them how the money can be taken back to Latin America and the Caribbean, and it will be used properly. One strength in Latin America and the Caribbean is the production of prototypes. In the US, it costs from 5 to 8 times more money to make a prototype compared to Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Peru, the Dominican Republic, and anywhere in Latin America. So that is one strength we are not tapping into. Another one is intellectual property. We are 4 or 5 times cheaper in making patents compared to the US. So that is why many people in the US realize this and then go and make patents in Latin America and the Caribbean first. And instead of paying $15,000 as they would in the US, they're paying from $3,000 to $5,000 in Latin America and the Caribbean. So what do? Once they have their patent, for example, in Colombia, say, they have 1 year to apply for an international patent, which costs only $1,800, and have a patent in the US too. And because it was already accepted in Colombia and the same review systems were used in the US, it's almost immediately granted. However, they saved 75% in the cost of patenting. So these two are common in every innovation ecosystem we've assessed in Latin America and the Caribbean. Two regional strengths we still haven't tapped into. What we do is bring together scientific groups with a business community, with investors, to try and strengthen high impact startups in sustainability and health. But the innovation ecosystem is not limited to sustainability and health. If you strengthen an ecosystem, you will start seeing online financing startups emerge, or gaming or video games businesses, or other kinds of businesses like advanced micro manufacture. So developing an innovation ecosystem forever is an investment that continues to yield profits for decades. The problem is how to get there, how to decode the way in which the ecosystem can be strengthened in a few years' time rather than decades. And that's precisely what we're working on with the OAS. And what are the outcomes from previous projects? We helped create and finance many different companies. Aryanne mentioned 300, but in sustainability and health, I counted the other day, and we have helped finance and create 472 high-impact startups since 2014. Everywhere where we strengthen the innovation ecosystem, we help reduce unemployment and underemployment amongst people younger than 25. I will speak about something that was chronic. In the south of Spain, we tried to strengthen an innovation ecosystem, and when we got there, unemployment amongst people younger than 25 was close to 40%, and underemployment was outrageous. The taxi driver that drove me from the airport to the hotel, it turned out, was a medical doctor. How come he was driving a taxi? We did our intervention, developed an ecosystem, etc., and underemployment disappeared. It disappeared. And unemployment went amongst younger than 25-year-olds from 40% to 8%. So that's very helpful. And then we created all the frameworks to have a functional, fully operational innovation ecosystem and left it there forever, because people who can maintain it that way have been trained already, and there are thousands of them. Some are left-wing, some are right-wing, some are center. If the left-wing wins, the ecosystem will be called Social Innovation Laboratory, while if the right-wing wins, they will call it Making Money Laboratory. But ultimately, they'll both be doing the same thing because they all have the same culture, they use the same language and have the same goal. And everyone lives in the same community and don't want to move. And they don't want their kids to go out to school and then do not return. That's another ugly phenomenon. People send their kids to universities in major cities and they won't come back because in their birthplaces there are no opportunities. We have reduced that very strongly. Since 2014, and this is a conservative number, we've helped finance or strengthen over 450 startups in many areas, in many industries. And here's where you can contact me. Until December 31st this year, I'll be using the email from the School of Public Health, the one at the top here. And starting on January 1st, 2024, I'll be using the email address below, Ramón Sanchez at fas.harvard.edu. My mobile phone doesn't change. This is a huge risk I'm taking in giving it to you. I'll entertain questions now. Thank you, Aryanne.
Thanks so much, Dr. Sanchez, for your excellent presentation. And I jot down a couple questions that I would like to ask you. I'm sure we have members of the audience who might have questions as well. You can go ahead and enter those into the chat. But I would firstly like to land on a concept that you mentioned. You mentioned the Boston ecosystem. And in the beginning of your presentation, you also mentioned Silicon Valley. Every time we work with entrepreneurs, we have them mention those examples of Boston, Silicon Valley as one of their role models they want to replicate in Latin America and the Caribbean. And we always tell them that they need to be careful because those models need to be adapted to Latin America and its different regions, right? So my question to you is, where do we begin with that adaptation? You mentioned infrastructure, that is something that needs to be worked on. And we have supported the launch of hubs, technology packages, and other features. And we ended up seeing that in the end, those weren't successful. We had a technology park that wasn't successful, for instance. And venture capital is another topic that you mentioned. Government support, legislation, regulation, right? So where do we begin? If, say, we come from a rural area, from a small city, and we want to create an entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem that is not maybe as successful as Silicon Valley, but that can take that as a role model. Where do we begin? Well, I'll tell you where we begin and where society begins. We begin by conducting a diagnosis and gathering information so that we can assess it and analyze it, so that we can look at the strengths and weaknesses of each ecosystem. Where does society begin? Well, society needs to trust us. They need to engage because we share information not only with governments, but with the thousands of members of the communities that are working to strengthen ecosystems so that they can know exactly what the strengths and weaknesses are to each region and what they can leverage in order to ensure quick progress. I mentioned, for instance, the strength of prototypes. Now I will go ahead and mention a weakness that we see across the continent. We need to learn English, technical English, that is. That will allow us to become more international. And why is that? Well, because people from the US and Europe are sometimes reluctant to come to our countries because they're scared of the language barriers. People who are part of incubators and accelerators or high impact startups from Ibero-American countries are never promoted because they lack English skills, right? So where do we begin? Become engaged, become interested in this, be part of, blockchain and augmented reality initiatives. Sometimes we have people tell us, well, I have a degree in literature. What can I do with that? Well, that is why I mentioned English. A person with a degree in English literature once saw that multinational companies in Ibero-America didn't have a high English level, right? They didn't speak a lot of English. So they decided to create a company dedicated to teaching technical English to people in these companies so that they can be promoted in their companies. And this person ended up creating a company who was headed by somebody who was a literature major, who wasn't an expert in technology. That is why it's so important to become interested as members of society in, how to strengthen the ecosystems, how to strengthen the programs, how to get the tools, even if they're not their areas of expertise. They need to think about how to strengthen the system from the inside. As an example, in that country where I mentioned that angel investors were banned, somebody suggested to create innovation civil societies. An innovation civil society is a non-for-profit organization that asks for funds from the private sector and creates vouchers for tax exemptions. So the private sector can invest and in turn get a tax exemption. So that's a win-win, right? But this non-for-profit organization also acts as the angel investor for the region, right? They have all of the funds from the private sector and they assign only 5% to internal management and 95% they provide to startups as angel investors. That is how they were able to sort of replace angel investors. And that was an initiative born from the community. If the community is familiar with all of the tools that they have and they can adapt them to the region, they can do it. A startup might need a resource that is only available in Europe, but if we can adapt that resource to Latin America, we can provide that from the region in order to strengthen our innovation ecosystems. Thank you so much, Dr. Sanchez. And just to add into what you were saying, it's also important to value interdisciplinary collaboration in developing technologies, right? We always fall back on AI, but we need people that not only understand AI, but we also need lawyers for ethical issues. We need people from human sciences. We need people that can teach and train other people on how to use this technology, right? So it's not just training and creating talent in science and technology, but also all of those other skills and interdisciplinary collaboration that allows for a company to fully work, right? Sanchez, Dr. Sanchez, if you can stop sharing your screen so that we can go ahead and go full screen. Here we go. And we still have some time, so I have another question. So in your experience, and, you know, we see there's a challenge in the region in this sense. So my question is, in your experience, does the technology industry have the power to take, quote unquote, a quantum leap in terms of economic development in the region? We are always talking about advanced technologies and blockchain, everything that you mentioned during your presentation. But in the OAS, I see people next to me who are working on setting up power grids in rural areas. So, there are different levels of development within the region in terms of technology. So, would it be okay to think that there has been a quantum leap in the region, for instance, in the rate of adoption of cell phone or mobile technology? And will the same thing happen with economic development in the region? The answer is yes, if people can engage and become a part of it. And let me give you another example. Let's say we are on an island in the Caribbean and we are paying 34 cents for a kilowatt for our power. And all of a sudden we get a new startup come to us and tell us, well, I can provide power to 10 cents per kilowatt per hour using solar panels running on sodium batteries. We've heard of lithium, but not sodium. But this company tells us, no, but we use sodium because it's cheaper than lithium and it's more accessible. How does it work? Well, we are going to set up these solar panels on the roof of your home or your business, and we will make the investment. But in turn, you will buy the power that those panels generate from us at 10 cents per kilowatt per hour. And you will have energy guaranteed for 10 years. Well, let's say we use AI to control all of your home appliances and ensure efficiency in your home. And we use IoT for sensors that are linked to technology, right? Well, let's say that company is Latin American. Well, that company has already taken a quantum leap, right? Because every single rural area that didn't have access to the power grid before because of high costs or extreme weather events that has broken down systems, or difficulty accessing diesel engines, or difficulty accessing funds for buying electricity. Well, all of that is gone because now there's a company that has seen an issue, that has identified a problem, and that has provided a solution. And since the area didn't have access to funding for that, the company funded the project in exchange for the community buying the energy from them. And that company actually exists, and they did that. And they, this company uses IoT, and they've conducted a living lab where they had solar panels, and they had local hotels send tourists on tours. Let's say, for instance, European tourists who were on tour in the Caribbean, they sent tourists to look at how those panels worked, and they used augmented reality to show them how these panels worked. And that was part of the startup as well. So you can see, Aryanne, the example that you provided, instead of having a landline, people are now using cell phones. Well, the same quantum leap can happen in energy as long as we leverage all of the tools that we have from other sources. For instance, renewable energies, transformative technologies, augmented reality, virtual reality, blockchain, IoT, and AI. All of those are resources that we can put to good use. Right, and here I would also add that everyone here, including the OAS, like say Harvard University, the Simón Bolívar University, all of us here have that common responsibility of educating Latin America and the Caribbean on these technologies, right? There are local products and services that can address local problems and that can be commercialized at a local and at a global level as well. And that's another takeaway from your presentation. There are a lot of existing solutions, but there is a huge communication gap in order to bring those to the market. These solutions may have a higher impact if they were able to reach, for instance, European markets, right? I see that Fernando is here and we have a question on the chat box. I don't know whether you wanted to read it, but I had an additional question. Are we on time? Yes, we are a little bit over time, but we will be closing the panel soon. We have a question in the chat and it reads, where can we get detailed information of the different assistance that can be provided to a Venezuelan venture? Is there a website with details? I think that maybe they're asking for a link or a website with resources. Well, Venezuela is a difficult case, right? Because of the situation, but something that can be done from Venezuela is crowdfunding. People can have access to crowdfunding websites in order to get funds for projects in Venezuela. Venezuela doesn't have angel investors. They don't have venture capital investors. So it's a pretty extreme case, but an opportunity that Venezuelan citizens can tap into are crowdfunding initiatives. I have a crowdfunding list and I can add it to the material that will be sent to the participants, but that's the only opportunity I see in Venezuela. You can lure investors and philanthropists, but I must say that things are a bit hostile and a bit complicated in Venezuela. So the option that I see as the best is crowdfunding. Well, from the OAS, we have a pretty successful scholarship program for master's degree and professional development and doctorate degree, where people can have access to education and assistance in terms of knowledge, which is also important. It's the Youth Academy. I will go ahead and enter it into the chat. We have scholarship programs. We have scholarships in Mexico that, for instance, cover 100% of insurance and maintenance costs for master's degree and doctorate's degree. And those are excellent. And we also have programs to support SMEs. For instance, we have an agreement with WhatsApp and with Google that provides SMEs the possibility to come out first on the list when people Google a service from a rural community and from a small community, so that they can always provide services to those communities. The OAS and Google has helped create websites and web search results for SMEs so that those companies can come up first on the list whenever people conduct searches. That's all from me. I know we don't have a lot of time left, so thank you, Dr. Sanchez, for joining us from Dubai. You are in COP28. I wanted to mention that, so I hope you have a fruitful event and fruitful negotiations. So from the OAS, we are also here to support you. So I will go ahead and type my email address into the chat box. And if you want to learn more about our initiatives and our systems, you can contact me and we will follow up with you. And also for the excellence centers, we need diversity. We need new players to engage with us so that we can ensure the success of our programs. So we have our doors open. We welcome every opportunity for collaboration. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ramón, go ahead. I just wanted to say thank you and let you know that you can go ahead and engage with us in whatever you want. We are developing the Central Florida collaboration program from St. Petersburg, Clearwater, Tampa, and Orlando. And we are teaching an online class in Spanish, and we also have an online class in English. So if you want to join for the Spanish class from wherever you are in Latin America, you can contact me. You had my email address at the end of my presentation. We only have 300 available seats, so to speak, for the class. So go ahead and request access. Thank you. Thank you so much. We will always be here to respond to any questions and help anybody who is interested to be in contact with Ramón. Thank you, everyone, and we invite you to continue to participate in the rest of our LEIRD conferences through Agora Video. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. See you.